Good day, guys. How you doing? You're welcome to my YouTube channel. So, if you'll be writing UTME 2026 or you'll be writing some O-level exams, you are in the right place. So, just sit down, calm down, and let's quickly revise few things in biology. So, today, what do I have for you? I have 10 common UTME biology questions and answers. So, let's get into it right away. But please, before we go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Question 1. The relationship between shark and remora can best be described as A. Parasitism, B. Amensalism, C. Mutualism, D. Commensalism. If you're familiar with biology, you didn't know that there's a kind of biology that studies the interaction between living organisms and with their environment too. So I will be limiting this to just interaction between living organisms, and that aspect of biology is what we call ecology. You understand me now? And we have a particular concept that we call ecological association. So we have different kind of associations that exist between different organisms. A very common one is symbiosis. Symbiosis is a close, long-term association that exists between organisms of different species. Please know that of different species. So symbiosis can be parasitism, it can be mutualism, it can be commensalism. So please, symbiosis is not equivalent to mutualism. They are different things, although they are similar, but they are two different terms. So kindly note that, please. So parasitism is, of course, an harmful association where we have the host and the parasite. The parasite is exploiting the host. That's harmful. Amensalism is a kind of association where, in my mind, I call it a direct opposite of commensalism, because in amensalism, for instance, now let me give you this instance. You have smaller plants that are growing, and then you have them growing under a very tall plant with um wide branches that are actually wide. They cover the smaller plants. The implication of this is that the smaller plants will have reduced access to sunlight, and as a result of that, it will affect their rate of photosynthesis, and as a result of that, also affect their growth rate. So in that way, they are being harmed because their growth is being impaired by the taller plants, and the taller plant, on the other hand, is not affected by heat. So that is amensalism. That is, one is being harmed while the other is not affected. You think of that, right? Yeah, that's a direct opposite of commensalism. So mutualism, of course, from the word mutual, that's a kind of that's a kind of symbiosis where both organisms are benefiting from the association. A very common example is the bee that pollinates the flower. In the process of pollinating the flower, it's also getting the nectar. In fact, that's what led it to the flower. The nectar that it wants to feed on, feeds on it, then takes the pollen grain, pollinate it, and that's mutualism. Another example is the leaching, algae and fungi. They benefit from each other. Then commensalism. Commensalism is the answer to this question. D. Commensalism is the answer, because the kind of association that exists between shark and remora fish is one in which one of the organism in this association is not affected while the other is benefiting. Can you see that as the direct opposite of amensalism? In amensalism, one is being harmed while the other is not affected. But in commensalism, one is not affected and the other is benefiting. So in this case, the remora is benefiting the food, the protection, transportation, while the shark actually is not affected by this kind of association. So the answer is D, commensalism. Question 2. When testing for the presence of starch in a leaf, the reason for dipping the decolorized leaf in off water is to A. Detect the starch, B. Kill the leaf, C. Soften the leaf, D. Remove the chlorophyll. The answer to this question is C. Soften the leaf. Now, this is a very common experiment that we use to test for starch, and that is to prove that photosynthesis has happened. And photosynthesis only happens in the chlorophyllous part of the plant, and that is usually the green part of the plant. majorly the leaf, because that's the organ for photosynthesis in the plant. You understand me now? So, in testing for starch, there are three steps to follow in testing for starch. First of all, you take the leaf in which you're testing the starch, you boil the leaf, and the reason for boiling the leaf is so as to stop all chemical reactions happening in that leaf, and by so doing you are killing the cells. That's basically what you are doing. And also, by doing that too, you are busting the starch grains in the leaf. That's the first step. Now the second thing you do, the second step you do, is to decolorize the leaf. And what is the aim of decolorization? That's you are removing the chlorophyll, and of course one way or the other you are allowing you are softening it so that the iodine you'll be using eventually can penetrate the leaf. Of course, you know that to test for starch, we use a particular substance called iodine. That's what we use for testing for starch, both in biology and chemistry. Test for starch is iodine. Are we together now? So the third thing you do, the third steps you follow, is dipping the decolorized leaf in hot water. And that's what the question is asking. When you dip it in hot water, what you're trying to do is that you are trying to soften the leaf. And that's why C is the answer here. You are softening the leaf. And in softening the leaf, by the time you apply the iodine, it reacts directly with the starch, and we have a blue-black coloration. Please note that coloration, blue-black coloration. This coloration means that starch is present in that leaf. So C is the correct answer. So the next question says the respective tissues that transport water and manufactured food in plants are A. Xylem and phloem, B. Phloem and tracheids, C. Phloem and xylem, D. Xylem and tracheids. So the answer to this question is actually A. Xylem and phloem. This is a very common and simple question. It's trying to ask you for the conducting vessels in plants. That is, what are those vessels that transport water and mineral salts? So let me just tell you this. Water and mineral salt are transported by xylem. Xylem, from the root to the upper part of the plant for different functions, of which photosynthesis is one of them. Then phloem is another conducting vessel. What phloem does is that it transports manufactured food up and down. Yeah, let me use that word, up and down. Although usually JAMB we denote phloem as transporting food downward, which is actually correct to some point. So when you see the arrow going downward, that is phloem transporting the manufactured food. Then when you see the arrow going up, that is xylem transporting water from the root, water and mineral salts. So option A and C might want to look the same, but remember you have the word respective in the question. That means you go with the one that transport water first before going with the one that transport the manufactured food, and that's xylem and phloem respectively. We're thinking of tracheid. Tracheid is a kind of cell that is a conducting cell that is found in xylem. So it is not a tissue by itself. It's like one of the cells you find in xylem. Remember, cells come together to form tissues. Tissue comes together to form organs, and organs come together to form system. That's another story for another day. Let's move. So question 4. The component of the cell that determines paternity resides in the A. Centrosome, B. Ribosome, C. Nucleus, D. Mitochondria. Of course, I'm sure you know this answer because you know that the center, the brain of the cell should be responsible for this. Yeah, and that's option C, the nucleus, because the nucleus houses our genetic material. That's the blueprint of life. And what determines who your father is actually the DNA that you have. And remember, your DNA is found in the nucleus. That is why when there is dispute as regards, okay, who is the father of this person, they tell you, let's go for DNA testing. That's it. And your DNA is found in what? In the nucleus. So what the DNA in your nucleus determines who your father is, and of course who your mother is too. So that is that for that. So I would also like to highlight this fact that mitochondria also contains DNA. But unfortunately, the DNA in the mitochondria is maternal. That is, it's only your mother's DNA that you have in your mitochondria. Your father's DNA is not in your mitochondria. So it is maternal DNA that we have in mitochondria. So, but the DNA that determines your paternity is found in the nucleus. Thinking of centrosome, centrosome is an organelle in the cell that is involved in cell division. You find your centriole inside this guy. Then ribosome is responsible for protein synthesis. Yeah, that's that for that. Let's move. The vertebrae that allows the skull to nod and rotate are A. Axis and cervical, B. Atlas and thoracic, C. Axis and atlas, D. Atlas and cervical. Now, I would like us to take note of that keyword vertebrae. Vertebrae, actually, these are animals that have backbone, and under subphylum vertebrata we have the phylum chordata. Now let me not go too far, but what I'm trying to enumerate is that you've heard of param before. Param. So your param or your param, they're actually vertebrates. That means they're animals with backbone. That is Pisces, amphibians, reptiles, your aves, and the mammals. These five classes, they are the five major classes of vertebrates that we have. And now, having explained what vertebrae means, this is actually what we call backbone. Backbone. And you find this in vertebrates. Let's now focus on the kind of vertebrae that you see in mammals. So we have five different types of vertebrae in mammals. We have the cervical vertebrae, we have the thoracic vertebrae, we have the lumbar vertebrae, we have the sacral vertebrae, and we have the caudal vertebrae. So the cervical is found in the neck region, the thoracic in the chest region, the lumbar in the upper abdomen, the sacral in the lower abdomen, and then the caudal in the tail region. Now let me just focus on the cervical. We have 7 cervical vertebrae in almost all mammals. Almost all mammals. In fact, it's fascinating to know that even giraffe, as long as his neck is, it has 7 cervical vertebrae. Now, the first cervical vertebrae we have is the atlas, and the second is the axis. Please note those two names, atlas and axis. So, atlas allows us to say yes. Please note that atlas allows us to say yes. And you know how you say yes? You nod your head up and down, right? Then axis allows us to say what? To say no. Rotation. So, of course, the vertebrae that allows the skull to nod and rotate are the atlas and the axis and atlas, and that is option C.